I thought I knew my husband. I thought I knew myself. But that day, in front of everyone, my ex turned our world upside down with just a few words. He looked at my husband with a smirk and said something that made my heart sink. "I'm better than you, and you know it." The room went silent. I froze, waiting for my husband to react. Would he yell? Laugh it off? I had no idea. But what he did next wasn't anything I expected. His response wasn't loud or angry. It wasn't even defensive. It was calm, deliberate, and so powerful it left the entire room stunned, and me speechless. That moment changed how I saw everything, my marriage, my choices, and even myself. Now, every time I think about it, I wonder, did I really understand the man I married? My name is Emma, and for most of my life, I've been someone who craved stability. Growing up in a small, peaceful town, I always imagined building a life that felt steady and secure. When I met my husband, Ben, it felt like I had found exactly what I was searching for. Ben is the kind of person you can rely on, a quiet, dependable presence who always knows how to bring calm to any situation. He's kind, thoughtful, and the type of man who would move mountains for the people he loves. Before Ben, there was Josh, my ex. Josh couldn't have been more different. He was magnetic, bold, and had an undeniable charm that drew everyone in. Being with him felt thrilling, almost like stepping into a whirlwind. But that excitement came at a cost. Our relationship was chaotic, full of fiery arguments and emotional roller coasters. Eventually, I realized I couldn't live in that kind of storm anymore, and I walked away. When I met Ben, it was like a breath of fresh air. He didn't try to sweep me off my feet with grand gestures or dramatic flair. Instead, he won me over with his quiet actions. The way he listened, the way he showed up, and the way he made me feel safe in a way I hadn't known was possible. Still, there's always been this strange tension whenever Josh reappears in my life. Even though I've moved on, he has this uncanny ability to stir up old emotions and make me question things I thought were settled. At social gatherings, his presence feels heavy, like an unspoken challenge. But Ben never let it faze him. He's always been calm, self-assured, and unshaken by Josh's arrogance. At least, that's what I thought, until the day Josh decided to throw his words like daggers, taunting Ben in front of everyone. What happened next revealed a side of Ben I never knew existed. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was something I'll never forget. It was a friend's birthday party, a lively evening with laughter, music, and chatter filling the room. Ben and I arrived together, as we always do, his hand resting gently on my back as we walked in. It was one of those nights where everything felt light and easy, at least at first. But then Josh walked in. I hadn't expected to see him there. Even after all these years, his presence has a way of pulling me back to a version of myself I thought I'd left behind. He was just as I remembered, confident, charming, and carrying that ever-present smirk that could both disarm and unsettle me. For most of the evening, we kept our distance. I was grateful that Ben, as usual, seemed unfazed. He was chatting with friends, effortlessly kind and engaging, while I tried to focus on enjoying the night. But Josh had a knack for making his presence known, and eventually, he made his way over to us. At first, the conversation was casual, almost pleasant. He greeted Ben with a handshake that felt just a little too firm, a grin that carried just a hint of condescension. The three of us stood in an awkward triangle, exchanging polite words, until Josh decided to steer the conversation into dangerous territory. "You know, Emma and I used to have the craziest adventures," Josh said with a chuckle, glancing at me. "You've got yourself quite the catch, Ben. She's one of a kind." Ben smiled politely, but I could feel the shift in the air. Josh wasn't just reminiscing, he was baiting, trying to assert some unspoken dominance in the room. Then came the comment that changed everything. Leaning in slightly, Josh smirked and said, "Not to brag, but Emma knows I set the bar pretty high. Must be tough, Ben, knowing you're coming in second." Time seemed to freeze. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my face growing hot with a mix of anger and embarrassment. I glanced at Ben, expecting him to react, to defend himself, to argue, or maybe even walk away. But he didn't do any of those things. Instead, Ben stood there, calm and composed, his expression unreadable. Then, in a measured tone that carried more weight than any shout or insult could, he said something I'll never forget. It wasn't what I expected, and it wasn't what Josh expected either. In that moment, Ben's words didn't just silence the room. They shifted something inside me, something I didn't even realize needed to change. Josh's smirk faltered for a split second, caught off guard by Ben's composed yet cutting response. Whatever words Ben had spoken, they had landed exactly where they were meant to. But instead of retreating, Josh doubled down, his ego refusing to let him lose this unspoken battle. The atmosphere around us grew heavier, the light-hearted party chatter fading into the background. Josh tried to laugh it off, his voice carrying a forced confidence. "Well, I guess we all have our ways of handling things," he said, looking straight at Ben. His tone was casual, but the edge in his words betrayed his frustration. I stood frozen between them, my hands clutching my drink, unsure of what to say or do. Inside, a storm of emotions raged, anger at Josh for his audacity, guilt for not stepping in sooner, and an unexpected wave of awe at Ben's restraint. He didn't rise to Josh's provocation, but there was a quiet intensity in his posture, a strength that spoke louder than any argument could. Josh, however, wasn't done. He turned his attention back to me, his words laced with familiarity. "Emma, remember that weekend at the lake? The crazy things we used to do." He laughed, as if sharing some private joke. "Ben must find it hard to keep up with you." My cheeks burned, both from anger and embarrassment. I wanted to speak up to shut him down, but the words stuck in my throat. Ben didn't look at me. He didn't flinch or show any sign of insecurity. Instead, he stayed still, his silence commanding more respect than Josh's theatrics ever could. But Josh was relentless. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a mock-friendly tone. "I mean, don't get me wrong, Ben. You're a great guy, I'm sure. But let's be honest, some things just can't be replaced." It was then that Ben finally moved. He turned to face Josh directly, his calm expression unchanged but his presence suddenly larger, more resolute. "You're right, Josh," he said, his voice steady. "Some things can't be replaced. But it's not about what's lost. It's about knowing what's worth keeping." Josh blinked, clearly unprepared for the quiet conviction in Ben's words. His grin faltered again, and for the first time, he looked genuinely unsettled. Ben didn't raise his voice, didn't let any trace of anger show. And yet, his words carried a weight that made Josh's taunts seem meaningless. The tension in the room was palpable now. I could feel the eyes of nearby guests subtly turning toward us, sensing that something was happening. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole, to escape this unbearable scene. And yet, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride in Ben. He wasn't playing Josh's game, but somehow, he was winning it. Josh, desperate to regain control, tried one last jab. "Well, I guess it's easy to feel secure when you've settled for second place," he said, his smirk returning, though weaker than before. But Ben's response left him completely disarmed. Without hesitation, he said, "Emma's happiness isn't a competition. It's a commitment. One I'm proud to honor every single day." For a moment, Josh stood there, speechless. The bravado in his demeanor seemed to drain away, replaced by something that looked almost like regret, or at least realization. Ben didn't wait for a reaction. He turned to me, gently took my hand and said, "Let's enjoy the party." As we walked away, I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze following us. My heart was pounding, not from embarrassment anymore, but from a newfound admiration for the man I married. Still, the encounter wasn't over for me. Even though Ben had defused the situation with grace and dignity, the emotional fallout lingered. I couldn't stop replaying Josh's words in my mind, the way they dredged up old memories and doubts I thought I had buried. And as much as I admired Ben's strength, I couldn't help but feel a gnawing guilt, for my past, for allowing Josh to get under my skin, and for the weight it might have placed on Ben. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Ben seemed unaffected, as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake the tension. I found myself stealing glances at him, wondering if he was truly as calm as he appeared or if he was just hiding the sting of Josh's remarks. The questions and emotions swirling in my mind made it impossible to focus, and I knew that eventually, I would have to confront them. When the party ended and the noise faded, silence became unbearable. As Ben drove us home, his face calm and unreadable, I couldn't stop replaying the night's events in my mind. The sharp sting of Josh's words, Ben's composed responses, and my own inability to intervene, it all weighed heavily on me. The guilt was suffocating. I felt like I had let Ben down, even if he hadn't said so. Sitting next to him, I kept glancing at his profile, searching for some sign of hurt or anger, but his expression remained neutral. That somehow made it worse. By the time we got home, I couldn't keep the thoughts to myself any longer. As soon as the door closed behind us, I blurted out, "Ben, I'm sorry." He looked at me confused. "For what?" "For tonight." "For not saying something sooner." I hesitated, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. "For Josh." Ben set his keys down on the table and turned to face me. His eyes were soft, his voice calm. "Emma, you don't have to apologize for anything. You didn't do anything wrong." But his kindness only deepened my guilt. "I should have stopped him," I said, my voice cracking. "I should have told him to leave you alone." I just froze, and I hate myself for it. Ben stepped closer and gently placed his hands on my shoulders. "You're not responsible for his behavior," he said firmly. "And you don't need to carry his words with you. They don't define us." Even as he spoke, I couldn't shake the self-doubt creeping in. Josh's comments had hit nerves I didn't realize were still raw. The memories he brought up, the way he twisted them to paint me as someone I wasn't anymore. It all felt like a betrayal of the person I had worked so hard to become. I sat down on the edge of the couch, burying my face in my hands. I feel like I brought this into our lives," I admitted. "He wouldn't have been there if it weren't for me." And the things he said, I trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Ben sat beside me, his voice steady and reassuring. "Everyone has a past, Emma. What matters is who you are now and the life we've built together. I don't care what he thinks or says. None of that changes how I feel about you." His words were a balm, but they didn't erase the guilt I felt. As much as I wanted to believe him, a part of me couldn't help but wonder if Josh's comments had planted a seed of doubt in Ben's mind. Had I inadvertently hurt him by letting my past walk into our present? That night, as I lay in bed next to Ben, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The silence of the room magnified my thoughts, each one louder than the last. I thought about the woman I used to be, the impulsive decisions, the carefree attitude, and how different my life was now. I had grown, changed, and found someone who made me feel safe and loved. But tonight had made me question whether my past would ever truly stay in the past. Josh's words had been designed to provoke, but they had also forced me to confront parts of myself I hadn't fully reconciled. I turned to look at Ben, his breathing slow and steady as he slept beside me. He had handled tonight with grace and strength, never letting Josh's taunts shake his confidence or our relationship. I wished I could feel the same. As the hours ticked by, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not let my past define me, and I would not let my guilt overshadow the love Ben and I shared. But I also knew this wasn't something I could simply push aside. I needed to face it, to talk to Ben more openly about how I was feeling, and to find a way to let go of the shame I had carried for far too long. The following evening, the tension that had simmered beneath the surface finally boiled over. Ben and I had barely spoken throughout the day, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I knew I had to address it, but fear of what might come next kept holding me back. After dinner, as we sat in the living room, the silence became unbearable. Ben was scrolling through his phone, his face calm but distant. I couldn't take it anymore. "Ben," I said softly, my voice trembling. He looked up, and the kindness in his eyes nearly broke me. "Yes," he asked, setting his phone aside. "I need to know," I began, my hands ringing nervously in my lap. "What Josh said last night. Did it bother you? Are you upset with me?" He sighed, leaning back against the couch. "Emma, I told you last night, I'm not upset with you. Josh's words don't matter to me." "But they matter to me," I said, my voice rising with a mix of frustration and desperation. "The way he talked about you, about us, it felt like he was trying to tear everything apart." Ben's gaze softened, and he reached for my hand. "Emma, no one can tear us apart unless we let them. And I won't let him or anyone come between us." His reassurance should have eased my mind, but it didn't. What if he's right? I blurted out before I could stop myself. Ben's brows furrowed in confusion. "Right about what?" "About me," I admitted, my voice breaking. "What if I'm not good enough for you? What if my past, my mistakes, are always going to come back to haunt us?" The words tumbled out in a rush, my deepest fears laid bare. Ben sat forward, his expression serious. "Emma," he said firmly, his voice steady. "Listen to me. Your past doesn't define you. Who you are today, the person I fell in love with, is what matters. You've grown, you've changed, and you've built a life you can be proud of. Don't let Josh or anyone make you question that." Tears streamed down my face as I shook my head. But I froze last night, Ben. I didn't defend you. I let him say those things, and I hate myself for it. Ben's voice softened, and he gently cupped my face in his hands. Emma, you're not perfect, and neither am I. But love isn't about perfection, it's about standing by each other, even when things get messy. You don't have to fight every battle alone. I'm here with you always. His words hit me like a wave, washing away some of the guilt and self-doubt that had consumed me. I don't deserve you, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Ben shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. You deserve happiness, Emma. And so do I. That's why we're in this together. In that moment, the dam broke. I sobbed into his chest, releasing all the pent-up emotions I had been carrying. Ben held me tightly, his arms a fortress of comfort and strength. As my tears subsided, I pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes. Thank you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For what? He asked, brushing a tear from my cheek. For reminding me of who I am, I replied. And for believing in me, even when I don't believe in myself. Ben kissed my forehead and smiled. Always, he said simply. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, I realized something important. Love isn't about never making mistakes or never facing challenges. It's about choosing each other, over and over again, no matter what comes our way. The next morning, the sunlight filtered through the curtains, bathing the room in a soft, golden glow. I woke up feeling lighter, as if shedding the weight of my guilt and self-doubt had allowed me to breathe again. Ben was already up, sitting on the edge of the bed, lacing his shoes. Morning, he said with a gentle smile when he noticed me stirring. Morning, I replied, my voice still heavy with sleep. For a moment, I just watched him, marveling at how calm and steady he always seemed. It was as though nothing in the world could shake him. As I sat up, the events of the previous night replayed in my mind. I felt a mix of gratitude and apprehension. While Ben's words had comforted me, the shadow of Josh's intrusion still lingered. Are we okay? I asked hesitantly, breaking the silence. Ben turned to face me fully, his expression kind but serious. We're more than okay, Emma. But you have to promise me something. What? I asked, my stomach tightening. No more doubting yourself. No more letting the past or anyone else dictate how you see yourself or us, he said firmly. We're building something real, something worth protecting. Let's focus on that. His words struck a chord deep within me. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not for my mistakes, but for the person I had become despite them. I nodded, feeling a sense of resolve I hadn't felt before. Later that day, I received an unexpected message from Josh. It was brief and unapologetic, but his words were unmistakably meant to stir the pot. Funny how some people settle for less and call it love. Hope you're happy. I stared at the screen, anger and sadness welling up inside me. For a brief moment, I considered responding, but then I remembered Ben's words. He was right, this wasn't worth our energy. I deleted the message and blocked Josh's number without hesitation. When I told Ben about the message later that evening, he simply nodded, his face unreadable. Good, he said. It's time to leave him, and all the negativity he brings behind. As the day wound down, I reflected on how far we had come as a couple and how much work we still had ahead. Josh's actions had shaken me, but they had also forced me to confront the parts of myself I had been avoiding. Standing on the balcony that night, with the city lights twinkling below, I whispered to myself, I'm not the same person I was. And I won't let anyone make me feel like I am. Ben joined me, wrapping a comforting arm around my shoulders. What are you thinking about? He asked softly. About us, I replied. About how I'm done letting the past define me. He smiled and pulled me closer. Then that's all that matters. For the first time in a long while, I felt hope, not just for our relationship, but for myself. Yet, in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder if Josh's interference was truly over. And that lingering question kept the door open, leaving me with an uneasy sense that the story wasn't finished yet. After everything that's happened, I find myself asking, was I wrong to think that maybe my past, my mistakes, would always have a hold on me? I thought I had moved on, but the moment Josh entered the picture, all those old feelings and doubts came rushing back. Ben's response was exactly what I needed, but still part of me wonders, did I handle everything the right way? Should I have confronted Josh earlier, or was it better to just let go and focus on what's important? What do you think? Do you think I did the right thing by letting go of the past and trusting Ben, or should I have faced the confrontation head-on? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Did I make the right call, or am I still missing something important? Let me know in the comments, because I really need to understand if I'm on the right path or if I'm just fooling myself into thinking everything's okay.